All right, thank you, Lisa, for assembling such a great crowd and fantastic lineup, and everybody prepared to get disappointed, because I will be the least interesting person on the stage today, but I'm fortunate to have these fantastic panelists talk about the future of brain-computer interfaces and neurotech in general. Quick intro, I'm a partner at venture capital firm Lux. We've been around for about 12 years. Sorry, what am I saying? I've been there for 12 years. Firm's been around for 17 years, and we've invested across healthcare and technology. We do seed, Series A, Series B investing, $1.5 billion under management. Current fund is a $400 million fund, and I've led investments in rockets, satellites, driverless cars, manufacturing automation, and also a proud investor in Josh's company, Control, which he'll tell you more about. So maybe we can quickly go down the panel. Starting with Kareem, maybe you can introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself and your company, and we'll then kick it off.
Sure. Imagine you can control your environment with your thoughts without using buttons or voice. So you can think to yourself, TV on and it turns on. Or picture being able to talk to Siri without actually opening your mouth. So you just think it and it happens. So this is exactly what we're building. My name is Kareem, founder at Cerebian, and we're building a Brain OS, which is an operating system that entirely redefines the way humans interact with computers. Our initial focus is on healthcare, and quick background. Academically, I studied law, but I've been coding for 14 years. I'm self-trained in deep learning and signal processing, and I'm very passionate about neurotech, and I'm excited to talk to all of you about it here today.
Josh, take it away.
Hi, I'm Josh Dion. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Control Labs, and we were founded in 2015 by 3 PhD neuroscientists coming out of Columbia, one of whom is Thomas Reardon, who early in his career created the Internet Explorer project at Microsoft. Fast forward to today, we are 65 people. We have offices in New York and San Francisco. We're building a non-invasive neural interface. The idea is to be able to improve human output, and specifically in pervasive and immersive computing environments. We make an EMG armband that listens in on the electrical signals and the muscles, and also in the individual motor neurons in the spinal cord. What else can I tell you? We're proud to have Lux Capital, GV, Matrix Partners, and Spark Capital, Jim Breyer supporting us. And we've raised we've announced more than $39 million in financing. And yeah, happy to share more with you as we get into it.
Pierrick?
Yeah. So, hello everyone, I'm Pierrick Arnal, Scientific Director of Dream. Dream is a neurotech company based in Paris and New York. And Taipei. So we merge neuroscience, medicine, technology into sleep product. And so we built a hardware device, so EEG dry electrodes device to monitor sleep. So it's a headband that you wear during the night. And so we developed different features, including a behavioral program based on the data that we gather from the device. To help people and to treat insomnia. And so we raised more than 60 million from J&J in the US and some partners in France.
Thank you. Mehran, take it away.
We all know someone suffering from depression. NeuroCore is addressing major depressive disorder with eminent risk of suicide. We have a new form of repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation with a new form of electromagnetic wave, which has fast and long-lasting neural effects. Our company is almost 7 years old now. We have completed our safety studies, and we are starting a pivotal study with a focus on children with intractable suicidal behavior in the second quarter of this year.
Awesome. Just to quickly poll the audience here, how many entrepreneurs do we have in the audience, or executives of startup companies? Okay, great. And how many big company people do we have here? All right, nice kind of little split. And then how many academics? Okay, and then government, military, People, okay, there we go. Awesome. There's always that one in the audience. Okay, fantastic. So, I'm going to throw out a question. And by the way, this panel was absolutely not prepared for this, and did that on purpose to make it more entertaining. So, it feels like neurotech is in a similar phase as where PCs were in the early 70s. A lot of the basic technology was there, but the applications weren't quite clear. People were putting computers in banks and hospitals, trying to sell them to consumers. And you know, if you were curious in the early 70s, hey, who is going to really monetize this future? We're sitting in a building right now named after the founder of NVIDIA, who maybe until pretty recently wasn't really regarded as important in computing, and here we are. So I would wonder, what lessons have we learned from that kind of exploratory phase in the early 70s that led to the maturation of the industry in the late 80s, where you had a lot of players, yet probably only Intel and Microsoft that were really generating margin. And so we all know that it's one thing to offer a product that is used and is purchased, and it's another to be able to build a very attractive business around it, be able to have a competitive position, be able to maintain and grow margin. What lessons can we draw from that kind of, I would say, that period in computing and apply it towards this industry being neurotech? I guess, Pierrick, do you want to start? Maybe because you have a product that's probably furthest along.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we have, I mean, having a hardware device, of course, we spent a lot of money to build the different version of the device, and now we are moving more with on a strategy with using this piece of hardware that enables different kind of application, where of course the margin, because it's more software based, is definitely better. But I think it's really important, and I think we saw that this morning, the importance of having a good measure. For example, in sleep, you know, we have a lot of sleep trackers on the market for years now. But the problem with this kind of device is you monitor really indirect measure, which is the movement for most of them, and then you extrapolate to have kind of sleep stages estimation to see if the people were sleeping or not. But I think really the point is having a good measure, a meaningful measurement, and you sleep with your brain and not with your wrist. So I think having these measurements and then spending money on that and then moving towards something that you can use some margin.
So I guess the very important takeaway here is that back in the day, in the exploratory phase for PCs, people didn't know what to do with them. I remember my dad helping me install a modem onto my PC XT, and he was asking me, like, what the hell do you want to, like, what's the purpose of connecting your computer to another computer? Like, why the hell would anybody want to do this? Because he was an engineer, he worked on dumb terminals, you know, at his company, and you know, and he didn't need to hook up a PC, you know, at home, you know, to another PC somewhere else, and that didn't make any sense to him. But the value proposition needs to be made more clear, and it took a long time. It took decades for the value proposition to be made clear. And what Dream is doing is obviously trying to focus on metrics, focus on actual value prop to customers to help them get comfortable with purchasing this product. I guess going back to the basics, Kareem talking about the operating system, I think Microsoft had a key role in avoiding the need for application companies to have to reinvent the wheel, to worry about, hey, what kind of hardware am I sitting on top of? How are you? What is your pitch, I guess, to the application folks? Because you have to kind of create this two-sided marketplace. You have to, you know, convince people to build hardware, that your operating system can abstract, and you have to convince people to build software that rides on top of your operating system. So how are you going about building this ecosystem around you so you can become the ubiquitous or the Microsoft of the future?
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question. So I'll start by saying Cerebin was started after winning the NASA Space Apps competition in 2016. So we've been around just for a couple of years. And everything that we've done to date has been bootstrapped, with the exception of grants that we've got from the Canadian government and from the Ontario Brain Institute. And our long-term mission is to seamlessly augment human and machine intelligence with an interface. So that's basically our long-term vision. And I'm excited to talk about it from a couple of different perspectives. But I should also mention that, so Cerebin is our technology is two components. It's we're building our own hardware. The first is a headset that you wear that measures brain signals, and the second is a software that takes brain signals and translates them into digital commands. We're starting specifically with the healthcare, and we're expanding, as I'm sure you'd all agree, and Shahin, there's so many different applications. So we started with the core technology and we realized, okay, we're creating X amount of value. How can we capture as much of it as possible, at the same time making an impact? So that's why we started with healthcare, because we believe there's a very high demand for the product that we're building, and then we expand onto other industries as we move forward.
So Mehran, NeuroCore, so you are taking a clinical approach initially. Do you see a future where neuroengineering or neurotech starts in the clinic, starts in clinical settings, and then those clinical applications then pave the way for consumer? Or do you think that is going to be a parallel path with efforts that take place, kind of like what Josh is doing, what Kareem is doing, and what Dream is doing on the commercial side? These will be two parallel efforts. Is one enabling the other, or is it just completely separate?
Speaking in the context of clinical application, for us it was very important to bridge neurotechnology with internal medicine and make sure clinicians actually take it seriously and they can use it for therapeutic applications when they need it. For example, transcranial magnetic stimulation has been around for decades now, but we still don't publicly fund it in Ontario because the gold standard is electroshock therapy. And so for neurotechnology...
Why is that, by the way? So TMS sounds kind of, fuzzy and soft and non-invasive, and then like there's thermal, like all this other stuff, this electric shock stuff, it's super invasive, DBS. Why do you think that's the case?
Because electroshock therapy and surgery work in 90% of cases.
There's evidence.
But and there is evidence behind it. But TMS works in less than 30% of patients. That is, 3 out of 10 might get into remission, 7 don't get into remission. And we don't have a good objective measurement in terms of understanding what was done during the therapy. So for NeuroCore, to make sure it's taken seriously within the clinical setting, it was very important to bridge neuroimaging and neuromodulation and speak to clinicians in their language and provide clinical evidence which is worthwhile. And insurance companies are willing to look at it, clinicians are willing to consider it. Other than that, innovating in the business model was important. Most of our competitors optimize their value through selling hardware, and they have had an issue with that, especially within clinical settings too. Selling capital hardware is very difficult, and for the treatment of depression in this case, even within a clinical setting, experience and service is very important. So in NeuroCore approach was to make sure we bridge internal medicine with neurotechnology and neuromodulation so that we are taken seriously by clinicians who work with MRI and not necessarily take into account EEG data, for example. Other than that, give them a new business model where we can make it accessible. We are no longer having a huge barrier with capital equipment, and we can also optimize the service and the experience for a patient. Did I answer your question?
Start, yeah. So maybe Josh can carry on top of that. So on the consumer side, obviously, you guys aren't a medical device. If you look historically again, Atari became valuable because of the experience that it was it was delivering. It was a unique gaming experience. Otherwise, I don't think anybody in this room knows how capable the 2600 was from raw technological horsepower perspective, or how much memory was in those cartridges. What mattered is that it was fun playing Asteroids. It was fun playing Frogger. There was an experience that came about. And so tell us about your vision for the experiences that you're going to enable at Control, and how you hope to monetize those and own those, as opposed to others kind of offering that on top of you.
Yeah, so I wasn't alive during the personal computing era getting built, nor was I around when the Atari happened. But so I'll have to trust the parts of history that I've been able to pick up from others. But the thing that I've come to believe is similar to that era, and why I'm working on what I'm working on, is that the size of the opportunity feels as big to me now as what I understand personal computing was then. And I sort of frankly continue to be surprised that that's not a larger consensus view. I would imagine most of the people here share that view, but I'm sort of surprised that more people aren't thinking that way. What feels different to me and how we're building the company, going after a large opportunity, is that our access to capital, frankly, to go build asset value is much different than it was in the 70s and certainly 60s and 80s. Microsoft got basically public without raising money from venture and didn't really need it when they took it.
They raised some. It wasn't quite called venture, but they raised some.
There was some
private money that went in. Yeah. But very little. Nothing like what Magic Leap, for example, was raised.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for us, the question is around how do we sequence building that asset value, or how do we map out the problem space, and then how do we think about going forward with that in order to be able to capture margin in the future. And some of it is being open about the fact that there are areas where we don't know how it's going to play out, and being open to options and serendipity, and other parts about being very intentioned in where we invest to create value, and having explicit plans to go deliver that through partners or directly to customers in specific use cases, and then being able to expand out from wherever we initially get traction.
So how about the expectation as to what kind of experiences beyond just being able to, think about things and making them happen? What have you thought about in terms of unique kind of applications on top?
Yeah, so if you come to our office today, you can play Dino Rider without perceptual movement, which is pretty fun. And early on, we actually did mock-up versions of Pong and Asteroids and some of these other games, both to be referential, but also because the control schemes in those worlds are more limited than the kind of the expectations of today's gaming or other application environments. For us, we want it to be personalized, and we want the user to be able to create their control scheme and sort of co-negotiate the way they'd like to interact with the machine. One of the sort of frustrations we have with today's computing is that the reduction of our behavior is all the same, that we all use the same keyboard, and if the P key is too far away from you or something else, you're forced to learn that way the machine wants you to behave. And in our world, we'd like you to tell the machine how you'd like it to work instead of you having to learn its system. And so some of it's about sort of inverting the power dynamics between you and the computer.
Helpful. How many of you watched Boardwalk Empire, or watched it when it was on? Okay, some of you did. So it's basically a historic kind of series based on Roaring '20s era, Prohibition era Atlantic City. This kind of gangster guy and his enemies and his friends. And if you see the way he interacts with technology, it's not a whole lot different from the way we interact with technology. We bark commands at our Siri devices, and Alexa, and he would bark commands out to his minion, who would tell him things, or fetch him the newspaper or whatnot, or get a car for him ready, which is what we do right now with our electronic minions. He'd be looking at his watch. He'd pull his watch out of his pocket every time he'd be leaving or coming or whatnot, just like we look at our cell phones the way we do today. So there hasn't been a whole lot of, even though there's been a lot of gadgets and technology around us, our behavior hasn't changed a whole lot over the years, except the gadgets have just gotten a whole lot more capable. So my question for the audience is do we expect neurotechnology, the adoption of neurotechnology, so for example, wearing this rig before we go to sleep, or moving our hands, or thinking about things instead of just moving our hands, having to focus our thoughts to do something. Do we expect there to be behavioral change that has to come with adopting neurotechnology, or do you expect it to be as transparent as going from a cordless phone to a pager or whatever, to a handset, to a smartphone today? How about Pierrick?
Yeah, I think as Ilan Bao showed this morning, I think it's like a transitionary period right now, because we built all these hardware, all these devices, but at Dreams we have a device, we have a headband that you wear during the night, but I think it's not the final destination. I think at the end, if we can have just something that you just stick on your head, just to monitor your brain activity, for example.
Yeah.
I think that's really. It doesn't need to change anything in your life. If it's really easy to use,
yep.
I think that's we don't change the behavior, but with that, with all the information that you gather from these devices,
yep.
Of course, I think there is a huge opportunity to change the behavior. And I take a case that I know pretty well, but insomnia. It's all about behavioral changes.
Yep.
And one of the first kind treatment for insomnia, it's cognitive and behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is basically explaining all the concept, all the sleep physiology, and putting in place some changes, usually for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And after you're done, you treat your insomnia. So yeah, I think it's going to change.
Yeah, Mehran. So today, if I'm a rep and I'm trying to sell to a physician, it's much easier for me to sell a pill, than it is to sell this gadget technology, So and I think most neurotech is in the form of a physical device as opposed to a chemical, pill that people would swallow and get better. So if you are an alternative to, I don't even know what the latest medication is for depression, how do you think physicians, how do you think you need to condition the medical community to get more accustomed to neurotechs, to avoid the neuropace 20-year slog, if that makes sense?
Yes, so in a clinical market, the value is coming from a problem. Right after that, we're addressing major depressive disorder. And when we talk to those doctors, because we have a non-drug treatment, we focus on treatment-resistant, basically patients who failed medication and or behavioral therapy. And they are considering electroshock therapy. Electroshock therapy is brutal. We are having an alternative to that, showing that it's also as good in terms of efficacy. With consumer market, that's not as clear. And that's a problem I have in most cases. I ask people, so which problem you're addressing? And when we are looking at the problems that we're currently addressing with neurotechnology, like epilepsy surgery, they're real problems. Millions of patients are suffering, and a handful of them, maybe 0.1% of them, are actually today going under surgery to do that. So when you have this real-life need, there is also a market for that. Electroshock therapy today has a huge market in 2019, and it's brutal. It's been around for like a century now. So when there is a problem, there is value in there, and there is this market. It could be a niche market, very small at the time, but there is potential for it to grow. So I would go about finding value for our product where we don't have another competition, or if we have a competition, we can do much better than them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'll pause for a second. Questions from the audience. We have the future Bill Gates of neuro here with his operating system. Go ahead.
Thank you. How do you address variability between different users, and what do you think about that issue for you guys?
So I'm, for example, Josh, if I tend to daydream very intensely and want to be able to play, Call of Duty without holding a controller, and my thoughts are kind of wandering, because I'm relaxing, playing video games, the thoughts are kind of wandering, but I also want to make sure I don't die because I was thinking about something else for a second, my controller or whatever drifted. How do you go about addressing, how focused do you have to be, do you think, to be able to operate control effectively?
Sure. So we read at the motor neural level, which are the neurons that live in your spinal cord that you use to turn muscles on and off. So you have to intend to do the thing that you're going to do. We make it better than having to go click on a mouse or touch a key on the keyboard, but you still have to want to do it. So if you're daydreaming during your Fortnite game, we're not interested. We're only interested in the volitional intent that you create. In terms of how personalized it is, I'll only speak for our technology, which I don't know is going to be a very satisfying answer. We use, the software that we're writing is such that we're taking the neural data that you're generating and we're feeding it into machine learning algorithms to try to get an output around your intent, and that's the control scheme. And so it's completely personalized to you. So every user can be completely different. Your neural patterns are different than everyone else, and that's totally fine with us, and we think of that as a feature, not a button. So we're excited about it, frankly. It allows us to identify you as you, and it allows us to build software that lets you do the things you want to do, and it's all upside down.
So in the case of PCs back in the day, they had it easy because, or I guess Microsoft had it easy because they were focusing on one, I guess it was the 8088 or 8086 architecture to run on. So whereas for you guys, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of platforms to be riding on top of. So how do you go about abstracting away this variant kind of group of hardware platforms? Or are you more focused on the biology? I'm just trying to understand, which side are you trying to abstract with the OS?
So with the OS, we're building the hardware and the software, regardless of what other. I don't think the integrating with other types of hardware is going to be an issue. I believe that the point just mentioned, like about the variability and the difference in between the users, is definitely is one of the main concerns to address. And exactly as Josh said, like it is a benefit as opposed to a detriment, because if you can build an approach that will enable you to adapt to a user's brain and calibrate accordingly, and do that within a short period of time after the user starts wearing your headset, then that allows you to scale across all users. And I don't know if I answered your question, but to also,
I guess the question is whether you're using a Utah array or if you're using some kind of surface electrode. Like, are you planning on completely abstracting all forms of capture of neural signals, or do you plan to build your own hardware and then build an operating system on top of that, and then open source that hardware? like kind of like Qualcomm and CDMA, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we're doing. We don't want to reinvent the wheel in terms of the software itself. With the hardware, we're building our own hardware that measures with electrodes that measure signals from the brain non-invasively. And in terms of the software itself, we're not reinventing the wheel like building an operating system from scratch. We're building on top of existing operating systems like Windows.
Got it.
And yeah. If I may comment as well on what you mentioned in terms of like the behavioral change, will behaviors change of the users? I totally agree with. I think that's definitely going to happen. I think it's entirely going to change over the next couple of years, especially over the next 10 to 15 years, because the interfaces themselves are changing. And when I said like our long-term mission is to augment human and machine intelligence, I was specifically referring to the fact that like smartphones today make us smart because we have instant access to information, but the detriment of that is that they distract us. But in the future, let's say 10 years from now, we're going to be able to, the interface is going to change itself, so you're going to be able to walk into somewhere, look at an item, and know its price without having to pull out your phone. And that's because you have instant access to computing.
Fantastic. Awesome. You guys have been a fantastic panel. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. And it's time for lunch. Lunch is on the ground floor, the very, very ground floor. We are going to be here at 2:05 with Michael Schneider, head of genetics and genomics here at Stanford. Thanks.